Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogrammed Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. And Chantal Donnelly, physical therapist and author of Settled, How to Find Calm in a Stress-Inducing World. Here at City Club Los Angeles, we follow our guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. We are back for the second half of our interview with Dr. Richard LaBrie at City Club Los Angeles.
I am being told, are a senior advisor for the FAA and Department of Homeland Security. Are you allowed to tell us what you do with them, or will you have to kill us if you tell us?
No. Well, I'm secondarily. So I work with a company called Salis Solutions. They are federal contractors who had some projects with the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, and Homeland Security on basically we created guidebooks for safety in airports. We did 3 of them over about a 3-year period. One was regarding mass shooters at airports. One was regarding insider threats, which would be like organized crime or spies or unruly passengers in airports. And the third book was about mental health awareness in airports. And these were distributed to all of the employees and managers in airports to help. There's like a training guide on some of these points. And the team, I was the psychologist on the first one for mass shooters, but the team involved current and ex-law enforcement, current and ex-intelligence services, military, medicine, airport operators and managers. And so everybody had chapters covering, how to prevent, how to spot possible mass shooter, how to react to, and then how to mitigate the damage, and then how to recover from it. And it was interesting. And then it put me in touch with a lot of the data on gun violence, which is really confusing and interesting, and a big topic in today's news.
How did they contact you? How did you get involved with Salis Solutions?
Oh boy, this is one. So I was working on a case that appeared to involve some trafficking of the client and violence. And the case got fairly scary. And I was at a point where, in our ethics code, if we become lost on a case or if we feel in danger, we're allowed to refer the client out. It's not abandonment, although the client may feel like that. I got to a point on the case where I asked the client, can I get you to sign a consent form for me to find out if there is a danger developing here? Because I knew some people. I knew some people when I was making an education film for the Department of Energy. And I knew some people who worked in security and intelligence who guided me on that project. And I hadn't talked to them in about 7 years. And I was starting to get really frightened. There seemed to be a threat to the client. There were a lot of injuries the client was bringing in. And something was happening with my internet. I noticed some people around the offices and one time near my house. And so the client signed the consent form and I reached out. And this is a little bit outside of scope. We're not really supposed to investigate. But in this case, it was to be able to continue the work with the client because we were progressing in the work. And I found out the threat was moderately real. It was hard to put a finger on it. And so I got a lot of security guidance from my friend who has his company, Salis Solutions. And then once that settled, about 4 months later, he called me and he said, hey, we're doing this mass shooter thing and we need a psychologist, somebody to bring the psychological behavior angle in. And so I started doing that. And it was a great relationship. I really love those people. And it's great to be part of that team and I learned there are people on the team who do everything you could possibly imagine in terms of keeping the country safe. And it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I keep thinking about this journey that you've been on from all the work that you did in the entertainment industry and then at 49 kind of going on this journey. I almost envision you with like a walking stick, kind of getting to your next phase, your next chapter in life. And I guess my question is, that walking stick, what would that have been for you? Was there some advice or some knowledge that you wish you had had to help you on your journey?
I was very focused. I will say that some of it really was rage. Like I carried a lot of rage from the film business. There's a lot of dysfunction. There's a lot of suffering that happens amongst crew members and creatives, and I just had it, and I wasn't using my full potential, my creativity, my intelligence, my intuition regarding people, and I didn't feel like I was contributing much anymore. So it was kind of I started hearing this mantra in my head, like, F you, I'll be a doctor. That was my stick.
Does that resonate?
He used the walking stick of rage on me plenty.
Did I? Yeah. On you? Oh, God. No, I didn't.
No, he's the most peaceful person.
You, Supatra, you experienced the similar. You left that industry and transformed your previous work in nutrition to,
That's exactly why I said, does it resonate?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
yes, I think the entertainment industry fills you with rage.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, as an editor in sketch comedy, I ended up in the best place I could. I was nominated for 2 Emmys. The show eventually won one, and they were great people to work with, and the hours were great, which is unheard of. But I knew it wasn't going to be repeated. And most of the things I worked on, I was working with good people, but I could see in the periphery that the people with hair on fire emotionally,
Right.
And I didn't want to step into it. So I guess that was the walking stick.
Well, you've had a lot of inspiration from your therapist. Do you have inspiration outside of that in terms of books that you've read, podcasts that you listen to, things that have really resonated with you that you can share with us?
The most important books I've read, I think, are Attachment and Psychotherapy, and also there's a book called The Human Element of Psychotherapy, a Non-Medical Model, by, I think, David Elkins. It's published by APA. It's 118 pages of pure, slim, race car brilliance about how the therapeutic relationship works, how it's not medicine, and it resonates with every, I guess, passion and theoretical drive that I have in the business. Also, I recommend Elizabeth Howell's work on dissociation and trauma. And recently I was really inspired by her book and how she described that trauma models were already being discovered in the 1880s by French neurologist and, I think, physician or psychologist Charcot and Genet. And then politics and infighting stepped in. Freud also saw the trauma history in his patients, but he also was battling with being a Jew in Vienna. And also he was working somewhat alone regarding, like, basically inventing the field, although he credits Joseph Breuer with inventing psychotherapy. And so he was torn between, are people having, flash fantasies about the abuse they're saying they had? Are they just hysterical, or did they actually experience abuse? And over time, battles happened. And then Sandor Ferenczi was able to validate that the patients they were seeing actually had been abused, because some of the abusers were the same people that the patients were reporting. So without doing much investigation, he said, well, this isn't a fantasy. These people are real. This is happening. But already 20, 30, 40 years had passed. And then even today, we just saw the collapse of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation because people who were claiming abuse and people who maybe were perpetrators of abuse were battling in the courts, and the media was covering it in such a way that some of the public would think, oh, that person's lying. That kind of trauma and abuse doesn't happen. It's too outrageous. Well, we know it's happening now, and I credit Vanderkolk for that, and The Body Keeps the Score. But that took until the 2000s for him to write that book and really clarify it for the public and clinicians that this is how trauma works. It comes from these precursors. It affects the body. It affects the mind. And then it's been furthered by Gabor Mate regarding maybe trying to reformulate the word trauma into missteps and mishaps in attunement growing up and throughout our lives, and we all have that, and kind of seeing people holistically through that lens. So it's that arc from Charcot and Genet landing to where we are now that I'm inspired by, but I'm also frustrated that we had to wait 100 and almost 40 years to embrace trauma models that these two men saw in 1885, 1889.
Yeah.
So I'm both inspired and frustrated by it.
I'm a big Gabor Mate fan.
Yeah.
He's Canadian, so I have a soft spot for Canadians because I am too. But I just finished, it's been a while now since I finished reading The Myth of Normal. Have you read this? For our listeners, The Myth of Normal is a really great book, but it is a big book. I think it's about 400 pages. So you really have to be settled in on a nice rainy day to get into it. But it is really, I think probably his last work. He wrote it with his son, and it's comprehensive, and it's a really nice sort of final, probably, explanation from his side of the world. For those who don't know, Gabor Mate is a trauma specialist, but also an addiction specialist. And he really, like you said, like Body Keeps the Score, Vanderkolk and Gabor Mate have really brought collective trauma and individual trauma and how it all works into the forefront. And people are finally getting to understand what's going on with them, right? Because we all walk around in the world going, what is this? Why am I reacting this way? And it's people like that who make it so tangible for us and help us understand. Yeah.
Well, we're about half hour in, and we'd love to open up our audience who are with us right now to see if there's any questions anyone might have. We do have a question.
Yay, question!
So you were talking about like holistic approaches to behavioral health, but I was wondering, like, when do you get to a point where you start using medications?
Well, as a psychologist, I can't prescribe, but if a client asks about medication and they're not on it, I'll usually give a little bit of psychoed. And by psychoeducation, I mean I'll maybe answer questions about a certain medication that other clients have used. You know, sometimes maybe a client will ask me, well, what have you heard about this? And I'll say, well, I've had a number of clients try it with different reactions. I'll give them some general information about kind of what to look for in your own side effects, and also to keep trying different kinds if you trust your psychiatrist or your general practitioner if they do prescribe. And I also give them like the main bit of psychoeducation, which is that I see medication as the thing that might get you onto the step stool that you need to stand on in order to function in your life and continue in therapy. But it's not a cure. It's something that helps you manage the symptoms. And in general, the research points to longer lasting outcomes from psychotherapy combined with medication or psychotherapy alone, whereas medication tends to often diminish its impact because your body adjusts to it, and also because it's not changing fundamental emotional, behavioral, cognitive patterns and even neurological patterns that we may have developed throughout our whole life. So I kind of start there. And my clients, I don't know, some of them are on meds. Often they'll stop the meds, partway through our therapy. And if they go through a situational change in their life that's stressful, they might go back on them. Most people don't want to stay on them. I mean, there's like a natural inclination to want to get off of them, is my experience. But I'm not pro or con. I just try to assist with, facilitating the decision-making process. And then if they want me to consult with the psychiatrist or the physician, I will. We're in a position to do what's called medication management because we'll see a client at least once a week, whereas the psychiatrist might only see them once a month. So we get to see how compliant they are with following the prescription and also ask them flat out, how are you doing with it? Are you having side effects? Are you seeing improvement? And so I'll notate that and then work with the client. So that covers that part, hopefully, of the holistic.
Any other questions out there in our lovely audience? Oh, we've got another one.
You had a question about your work with the FAA. Was that prior to the COVID pandemic or afterwards?
It was prior and into.
And that leads to my actual question is what changes did you see in behavior from whether there was people on flights or in the airport after flights resumed, in 2020?
Yeah, we ended up adding sections to the mental health awareness book regarding COVID, and then hopefully we wrote them in a general enough way that they would apply to any pandemic or any disease issue, transmissible disease issue on a plane. We dealt with client passenger rage, and we had to start talking about misinformation and people's kind of frustration, emotional frustration with lockdown. It kind of was a big conversation, especially on the third one. With the mass shooter one, the active shooter one, we really didn't have to consider it because I think that was 2018. Insider threat was 2019 into 20, and then we started to veer into it. And mental health awareness was definitely during the pandemic. And safety protocols changed, talking about masks, talking about distancing, and whether a particular frustration in a passenger was inherent to who they were, they would be frustrated anyway, or was compounded by the stresses of COVID. So, yeah, we did.
Did it carry beyond that, when things started to open up and we started to see so much more rage on airplanes? Did you delve into that as well?
I think we were done by then. I think we had published it. And by the way, those guidebooks are free on the internet. You can, if anybody's interested, they're under the Safe Skies banner, and they're all of them. They're publicly funded, so they belong to the citizens of the U.S. So you can look them up.
Wonderful, great. Any other questions? We do have another one. Yay! Come on down to the microphone.
You mentioned that the therapist would have an ethical obligation at times to perhaps refer the client to another source of therapy or therapist. When does the therapist realize that they've gotten to that point? And is there an expectation that therapy for a client might be might go on forever, or is there an expectation that there would be a conclusion at some point?
So in our training, a big part of our training is called attention to the person of the therapist. And that's because we are, if you think about a painter, they have a palette and they have their brushes, but it's the way they use them. It's the way they hold the brush and move the brush and how they make the vision in their head go onto the canvas. And so we're trained in all of these types of treatment and the diagnoses and things, but we are the artist. We are the ones who are going to take those parts of the palette and apply them with the client. And the client becomes a part of the creative process too. Hopefully we have the insight to see that something's not working and that it's not ethical to continue, or if the client hits a certain type of topic that's triggering to us and we can't get beyond the trigger through our own consultation, our own therapy, and it starts to distort our thinking or whatever, or we're too distracted, then we have an obligation to refer out. It's pretty rare. I've only referred out a couple of clients, and it was very painful to do because they were very intense situations. And what was the second part of the question? It was, whether therapy would go on forever. In clinical training, we're usually at places that have waiting lists, and there's a very kind of concrete way of treating, and the supervisors will often teach us how to terminate because that client is, quote, done. As soon as you get into private practice, I don't know if you experienced it. The first time I tried that with a client, I checked in and said, well, do you think you've reached your goals? Maybe we're looking at the end. It hurt their feelings, and I never did it again. And I asked another supervisor, how do you do it? And she said, I wait for the client to bring it up. And if it seems too early, I'll let them know my feelings about it. And if it seems right, we'll collaborate on how to end the therapy, and then we'll work towards that. But I definitely have some clients that will probably be with me for the rest of their lives or mine, because I get to do that. I have a right to do that. I'm not forced by a clinical director to clear my slate and bring in new people. And there are some people who've just been through such horror shows that the therapy creates a stability that allows them to get through their life. And there's another part of therapy that, this is why I sometimes bristle against the clinical label that I carry with my degree. Therapy is not only about curing a symptom. Some people stay in therapy for a long time because they hit one goal and then they have another level they want to reach in their life in terms of their own, the old term, self-actualization, realizing their goals. And I stay in therapy a very long time because I will always think of something else. If it's not a problem, it's another goal. And a therapeutic relationship is unique. You can't get it from your family. You can't get it from your partner. It's sort of neutral and sort of not. And it has a lot more room. So sometimes I question myself and I think, am I keeping my clients too long? Because they do stay a really long time with me usually. And then I have to comfort myself and say, I'm not a charlatan. I look over at my closed file list, my closed file drawer, and it's filled with people who finished. And I remind myself, okay, I do complete the therapy, but it's not front of mind for me. It's a very organic process.
I think people also think of therapy as self-care, just as you would go to the gym or, go get your nails done or something like that. People tend to, go to and stay in therapy because it's providing them, relief from stress. It's helping them problem solve. It's helping them learn how to communicate better with their spouse. And those kinds of things don't just have a natural end. We have things that come up all the time. So I relate in that, people who stay a long time in therapy, they rely on it for their own self-care.
Yeah, and some people reach their goal and they're busy people and they want that hour back. And so they finish, and that's also perfectly appropriate, and maybe has more of a clinical lens. I like when clients say this, or when I ask of it. Recently, a client shared with me that they were talking with a supervisee, a student, and they mentioned therapy, and the student said, "Oh, you're in therapy." And the client said, "Yeah." And the student said, "What's it like?" And the client said, "Well, the therapist doesn't really tell you what to do." And the student said, "Really? Well, what do they do?" And the client said, "I think me, is filling in the gaps that were missed by my parents in a very slow, gentle way." And that was great for me to hear, because I think it is what was happening with that client. And other clients would describe it differently. And I love asking my clients that question to give me guidance. Sometimes just checking in and saying, how is this going? Should I make some adjustments or something? And it helps me, and it's nice to hear what the style is that the client's experiencing, because it might be different from what I'm experiencing or what I think I'm doing. And I love that part of the field, that I can't be arrogant enough to understand what's impacting the client. And that's why asking a client about termination, because I feel like something's not working, can really surprise me, because there's something else working that I didn't know about.
Right.
And so I'm very careful. I'm very laid back about how to continue or end. So.
Well, speaking of end, we have to terminate this podcast episode, but we really want to thank you, Dr. LaBrie, for coming and being our first guest and sharing your journey, because that's the whole point of this, is that we want to hear about your journey so that it inspires ours. And we have gotten so much out of this today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Yeah. Great questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. Please remember, the content shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight Podcast tab. Follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.